The sky was burning. Ambassador stood at the observation window of the orbital station, his crystalline body trembling as he watched his world die below. A planet of gentle oceans and singing forests was covered in fire and smoke. Ships shaped like black insects moved through the atmosphere, dropping bombs that turned cities into ash. The Devourer fleet had come without warning. One moment, they were celebrating the festival of first light. The next moment, their orbital defenses were gone, destroyed by weapons they did not even know existed. Pressed his thin fingers against the cold glass. His people were pacifists. They had been pacifists for 10,000 years. They believed that all conflict could be solved with words, with art, with understanding. They had no warships. They had no soldiers. They had only diplomats and artists and dreamers. And now those dreamers were dying by the millions. "Ambassador," said a young aide named, her voice shaking, "the planetary shields have fallen. The Devourers are landing ground forces in the capital." Closed his eyes. The capital, where the great libraries stood, where children learned to paint and sing, where his own family lived. "How long?" he asked. "Hours," replied, "maybe less." Around them, the orbital station was filled with refugees. Thousands had escaped to space before the attack, but they had nowhere to go. The station had no weapons, no jump drives, no way to fight or flee. They could only watch and wait for death. Thought about the Galactic Council. Surely they would send help. Surely someone would come. But he knew the truth. The Council was far away. Their fleets would take weeks to arrive. And even if they came, the Council species were not warriors. They were traders and scholars, just like They would send strongly worded messages. They would condemn the attack in official documents. They would do nothing that mattered. The Devourers knew this. That was why they attacked. They were predators who fed on the weak, and the galaxy was full of weak species who had forgotten how to fight. "There is one option," said an old advisor named. He spoke quietly as if afraid of his own words. "The beacon." Turned sharply, "That is forbidden." "Forbidden by the Council," agreed. "But the Council is not here, and we are dying." The beacon. Every knew about it, though none spoke of it openly. 300 years ago, the Galactic Council had discovered a species in a remote sector of the galaxy. A species from a world so dangerous, so hostile, that it should have been impossible for intelligent life to evolve there. Earth, they called it, a planet of crushing gravity, poisonous atmosphere, extreme temperatures, and endless natural disasters. The creatures that lived there had survived by becoming something terrible. They were persistent predators, hunters who never stopped chasing their prey. They had fought wars against each other for their entire history. They had split atoms and walked on their own moon. They were afraid of nothing. The Council had watched them in secret. They had seen the humans fight and die and rebuild and fight again. They had seen their terrible creativity, their endless hunger for more. And they had decided that humanity must never join the galactic community. Too dangerous, the Council said. Too violent, too unpredictable. Contact with Earth was forbidden. Any species that reached out to humanity would face severe punishment. But the Council was far away, and the Devourers were here. "If we send the beacon," said slowly, "we do not know what will happen. The humans might ignore us. They might come and conquer us themselves. We know nothing about them except that they are dangerous." "We know one thing," said. "We know they protect their own. Every record, every observation shows the same pattern. Humans form bonds with others. They call it friendship, family, pack. And when those bonds are threatened, they become something terrifying." He paused. "Perhaps if we ask for help, they will see us as worth protecting. Or perhaps they will see us as weak prey," said. "We are already prey," replied. "The Devourers have made certain of that. The question is whether we die quietly or reach out for any chance of survival." Looked back at the burning world below. He thought about his daughter, who loved to paint pictures of the 3 moons. He thought about his son, who wanted to be a singer when he grew up. He thought about all the millions of who had done nothing wrong, who had only wanted to live in peace. "Send the beacon," he said. The words felt like a betrayal of everything he believed. He had spent his whole life trusting in diplomacy, in peaceful resolution, in the goodness of all beings. Now he was calling for help from a species that the entire galaxy feared. Moved quickly to the communication console. His fingers danced across the controls, activating systems that had been dormant for centuries. The beacon was old technology, built in secret by scientists who had worried that someday their pacifism would not be enough. "What message should I send?" asked. Thought for a moment. Humans were simple creatures, according to the Council records. They responded to direct communication, to emotional appeals, to cries for help. "Tell them the truth," said. "Tell them we are dying. Tell them we have no weapons, no soldiers, no way to save ourselves. Tell them we are asking anyone, everyone for help." He paused. "Tell them, please." Entered the message. The beacon activated with a low hum, sending a signal across the vast emptiness of space toward a small blue planet in Sector 7G. Then they waited. On Earth, it was morning in the city of New Seoul. Admiral was drinking her first cup of tea when her personal communicator buzzed with an urgent alert. She set down the cup and read the message, her eyes narrowing as she processed the information. An alien distress signal, origin unknown, content translated by automated systems. She read the translation, "We are dying, please anyone." For a long moment, Admiral sat in silence. She was 53 years old. She had commanded ships for 30 years. She had seen humanity reach the stars, build colonies on distant worlds, and wonder if they were alone in the universe. Now she knew they were not alone, and somewhere out there, someone was calling for help. She pressed a button on her communicator. "This is Admiral, connect me to Defense Command, Priority 1. "Admiral," came the reply, "what are your orders?" Stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was rising over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. It was a beautiful morning, a peaceful morning. But peace, she knew, was a luxury that someone else could not afford. "Mobilize everything," she said. "We are going to war." 48 hours passed like 48 years for the survivors. Ambassador had not slept since sending the beacon. He stood at the observation window, watching the Devourer ships circle his world like vultures around a dying animal. The ground forces had taken the capital. The last resistance had ended hours ago. Now the Devourers were simply harvesting, collecting resources and prisoners for their empire of cruelty. "No response from the beacon," reported, her voice hollow with despair. "Perhaps the humans did not receive it. Perhaps they do not care." Said nothing. He had gambled everything on a desperate hope, and it seemed that hope had failed. Soon the Devourers would turn their attention to the orbital stations. Soon there would be nothing left of the at all. Then the sensors screamed. Every alarm in the station activated at once. Red lights flashed. Automated voices announced emergency protocols. Rushed to the sensor console, her crystalline fingers moving frantically across the controls. "Massive energy readings," she gasped. "Something is coming out of fold space, something big." Felt his heart stop. The Devourers have called for reinforcements. "No," said, "the signature is different, unknown technology, unknown origin." She paused, her eyes growing wide. "Ambassador, there are hundreds of contacts, hundreds." The flickered and changed, showing the space above the planet. At first, saw nothing but stars. Then the stars began to move. No, not move. Ships were appearing where the stars had been, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. 1 ship, 10 ships, 50 ships. They kept coming. Counted as long as he could before losing track. Warships of every size filled the space around the. They were ugly ships, brutal ships, covered in armor and weapons and strange symbols that did not recognize. At the center of the formation flew the largest vessel, a dreadnought that dwarfed everything around it. 372 ships, whispered. The energy readings are off the scale. Ambassador, who are these people? Felt tears forming in his crystalline eyes. He knew. Somehow, impossibly, he knew. The humans, he said, they came. Aboard the flagship Unbroken Soul, Admiral stood on the command bridge and studied the tactical display. The Devourer fleet was larger than intelligence had suggested. Over 1,000 ships of various sizes, arranged in a loose defensive formation around the planet they were consuming. "Report," she ordered. Commander stepped forward. He was a tall man with gray hair and calm eyes, a veteran of a dozen conflicts. Enemy fleet confirmed. Approximately 1,100 vessels, mostly light cruisers and destroyers, but I count at least 40 capital ships. They outnumber us roughly 3-1. Shields and weapons status. All ships report ready, Admiral. The fleet is awaiting your command. Nodded slowly. Around her, the bridge crew worked in focused silence. Lieutenant monitored tactical analysis. Ensign sat at the weapons console, his young hands steady despite the tension. Lieutenant managed communications, listening to the flood of chatter from the Devourer fleet. "They're confused," reported. "They didn't expect anyone to come. They're asking their command for orders." "Then let's introduce ourselves," said. "Open a channel, all frequencies." Press several buttons. "Channel open, Admiral." Straightened her uniform and faced the main. Somewhere out there, the Devourer commander was watching. Somewhere out there, the survivors were watching too. This moment would be remembered for a long time. "Attention, Devourer fleet," she said, her voice clear and cold. "This is Admiral of the United Terran Defense Force. You are attacking a civilian population that has requested our protection. You will cease all hostile actions immediately and withdraw from this system. This is your only warning." The response came quickly. The flickered and an alien face appeared. The creature was, with multiple eyes and mandibles that clicked as it spoke. Its voice was translated by the ship's computer into harsh, mocking words. "I am Supreme Commander of the Devourer fleet. You are far from home, little mammals. This world belongs to us now. They are weak. They called for help and no one came." The mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. "Go back to your tiny planet. You have no stake in this fight." Smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator that had just found its prey. "You hurt someone who asked for our help," she said. "That makes it personal." His eyes narrowed. "You cannot be serious. You are outnumbered. You will die here and no one will remember you." "Perhaps," agreed, "but we will take a lot of you with us. And trust me, Commander, the ones who survive will never forget what happened here. They will tell stories about this day. They will warn their children about the monsters from Earth who came for blood." She leaned forward. "So make your choice. Leave now and live. Stay and learn why the galaxy calls us." The channel went silent for a long moment. Every human in the fleet held their breath, waiting, then made a sound that might have been a growl. "Kill them all," he ordered. "Leave none alive." The channel closed. Across the void, the Devourer fleet began to move, thousands of weapons charging, a wall of destruction aimed at the human armada. On the orbital station, Ambassador watched in horror. "They are going to fight," he breathed. "The humans are going to fight a fleet 3 times their size for us, for strangers." He rushed to the communication console and opened a channel to the human flagship. A young woman's face appeared on the screen. "Lieutenant." "Please," said, "you do not need to do this. We are grateful that you came, but we cannot ask you to die for us. We are nothing to you. We are strangers." There was a pause. Then Admiral's voice came through the speakers, calm and almost gentle. "Ambassador, where we come from, we have a saying. Strangers are just friends we haven't made yet." Another pause. "Now sit back and watch what happens when you hurt our friends." The channel closed. Saw the human fleet surge forward, weapons blazing, missiles launching, fighters pouring from carrier bays like angry insects. They charged directly into the heart of the Devourer formation, outnumbered and screaming defiance into the void. Commander's voice echoed across the human fleet. All ships, weapons free. Show them what humanity is made of. Ensign fired the first salvo from the Unbroken Soul. The massive cannons roared, sending beams of pure energy into the Devourer lines. Ships exploded. Shields failed. The darkness of space lit up with fire and death. The battle had begun. And somewhere in the chaos, a young Devourer officer looked at his sensors and felt something he had never felt before. His species was predators, hunters, conquerors. They had destroyed 100 worlds. They had never known fear. But now, watching the human ships tear through his fleet with savage fury, he understood. The galaxy had warned them about They had laughed at the warnings. They were not laughing now. The galaxy had theories about human warfare. Every species that knew about Earth had studied the records, watched the transmissions, tried to understand how such a violent species had survived long enough to reach the stars. They had seen the monuments to human wars, the endless conflicts that stretched back to the beginning of their history. They thought they understood. They understood nothing. The Devourer fleet was built for intimidation. Their strategy was simple. Arrive in overwhelming numbers, terrify the enemy into surrender, harvest the planet at leisure. It had worked 100 times before. It was working on the who had no way to fight back. The humans did not work that way. In the first minutes of battle, the Devourers formed a standard defensive line, presenting a wall of weapons to the approaching enemy. It was textbook tactics, the kind that worked against every other species in the galaxy. Commander watched the enemy formation and smiled. They're grouping together. They want to concentrate their firepower. That's a mistake, Admiral observed. Yes, it is. All destroyer squadrons execute Pattern 7, show them what mobility means. The human destroyers were small compared to the Devourer capital ships. They were fast, agile, and carried weapons that punched far above their weight. They split into 8 groups and dove into the gaps between enemy formations, weaving through fields of fire that should have destroyed them. The Devourers tried to track them. They failed. Their targeting systems were designed for enemies who flew in straight lines, who followed predictable patterns, who behaved like sensible beings. Humans were not sensible. Lieutenant coordinated the attack from her tactical station. Destroyer Group 3, adjust heading by 4 degrees. You have an opening on their supply ships. The destroyers adjusted. Missiles launched. 3 Devourer supply vessels vanished in expanding balls of flame. Group 7 pull back. Enemy cruiser swinging to intercept. Group 7 pulled back. The enemy cruiser overextended, leaving its flank exposed. 2 human frigates pounced from behind an asteroid, tearing its engines apart with precision strikes. The Devourers had never fought an enemy like this. Their prey usually panicked, ran, or surrendered. The humans did none of these things. They moved like water, flowing around obstacles, filling gaps, striking where the enemy was weakest. And then there was the Unbroken Soul. The human flagship pushed through the center of the battle, ignoring the swarms of smaller ships around it. Its hull was from a dozen hits, but it kept coming. Nothing the Devourers threw at it seemed to matter. Ensign sat at the main weapons console, his eyes fixed on his screens. He was 22 years old. He had trained for this his whole adult life, but nothing had prepared him for actual combat. The noise, the shaking, the knowledge that one lucky hit could end everything. He pushed the fear aside and focused on his job. Main cannon charged, he reported. Target locked, enemy command ship in range. Admiral nodded, fire. The main cannon of the Unbroken Soul was a marvel of human engineering. It took 3 minutes to charge and carried enough energy to crack a small moon. When it fired, The beam was visible across the entire battlefield, a shaft of blinding white light that connected the human flagship to the heart of the enemy fleet. Its command ship had the strongest shields in the Devourer fleet. Those shields held for exactly 1.4 seconds. Then they failed, and the beam cut through the vessel like a knife through paper. The command ship split in two. Secondary explosions tore through its hull. Escape pods launched in desperate panic, but most of them were caught in the blast radius. Was dead. The news spread through the Devourer fleet like a disease. Their supreme commander, their undefeated leader, was gone, killed by creatures half his size, from a planet that most of them had never heard of. Panic began to set in. But the humans were not finished. Sergeant Major commanded the Marine forces aboard the Unbroken Soul. She was 41 years old, with gray streaks in her black hair and scars on her hands from 20 years of close combat training. She had been waiting for this moment since the battle began. "Boarding parties ready," she reported. "Targets identified." Admiral studied the tactical display. Several damaged Devourer ships were drifting, their engines destroyed but their hulls intact. They were full of intelligence, technology prisoners. "Go," ordered. The boarding shuttles launched. They were small, fast, and heavily armored, designed to punch through enemy hulls and deliver their cargo of angry humans into the heart of enemy vessels. Private was on the first shuttle. He was 19 years old, the youngest Marine in his squad. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Around him, his checked their weapons and armor with practiced efficiency. "First boarding action," Sergeant Major observed, looking at him. "Scared?" "Swallowed, yes, Sergeant Major." "Good, fear keeps you alive. Channel it." The shuttle hit the enemy hull with a bone-jarring impact. Cutting lasers activated, slicing through alien metal. Atmosphere rushed out, then stabilized as the shuttle's seals engaged. The door opened. Had seen pictures of Devourers. He was not prepared for the reality. They were huge, with multiple limbs and natural armor that looked like it could stop a bullet. They turned toward the breach, weapons raised, mandibles clicking in what might have been war cries. Was through the door before anyone else. She moved with a speed that seemed impossible for her age, her rifle firing in controlled bursts, each shot finding a joint in the enemy armor, a gap in their defenses. The other Marines followed. The corridor became a chaos of gunfire, screaming, and the wet sounds of close combat. Found himself face to face with a Devourer twice his size. The creature swung a blade at his head. He ducked, felt the wind of the passing edge, and fired 3 rounds into the thing's exposed throat. It fell, he stepped over it and kept moving. The Devourers were not prepared for humans in close quarters. They were used to prey that ran, that begged, that died easily. These humans did not run. These humans did not beg. These humans fought with a fury that seemed almost personal, as if each death had been a wound to their own souls. Within an hour, the captured vessels were secured. Prisoners were taken. Intelligence was gathered. And the Devourer fleet, watching their ships fall one by one, made a decision that no Devourer fleet had ever made before. They fled. The great predators of the galaxy, the harvesters of 100 worlds, turned their ships and ran from the monsters of Earth. Lieutenant tracked their retreat on her console. Enemy fleet is scattering. They're jumping to fold space, multiple exit vectors. Commander let out a long breath. Should we pursue? Admiral considered the question. Part of her wanted to chase them, to hunt them down, to make sure they never threatened anyone again. But she looked at the damage reports, the casualty lists, the ships that were limping instead of flying. "No," she said. "Let them go. Let them tell their friends what happened here." She turned to face her crew. They were exhausted, battered, but alive. They had won. "All ships, this is Admiral. The enemy is in retreat. Secure all positions and begin rescue operations for survivors. We came here to save people. Let's finish the job." The fleet acknowledged, and across the void on the orbital station, Ambassador watched the Devourer ships disappear into fold space, running from the battle like frightened animals. He had never seen anything so beautiful in his entire life. The battle was over. The enemy was gone. The was saved. But victory, Admiral knew, was never free. She walked through the corridors of the Unbroken Soul, and everywhere she looked, she saw the cost of what they had done. Scorch marks on the walls where fires had been fought, sealed doors where sections of the ship had been exposed to vacuum, crew members working with bandaged hands and exhausted eyes to repair systems that had nearly failed. 47 ships. That was the number that kept running through her mind. 47 human vessels would not be returning home. Some had been destroyed in the first minutes of battle. Others had held together long enough to evacuate their crews before the systems failed. A few had simply vanished, consumed by explosions so complete that nothing remained. 12,000 sailors, 12,000 men and women who had answered the call, who had traveled across the galaxy to help strangers they had never met, who had given everything they had. Stopped at a viewport and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, families were waiting. Parents who would never see their children again. Children who would grow up without their mothers or fathers. Lovers who would wait forever for messages that would never come. Was it worth it? She thought about the refugees on the orbital stations. She thought about the survivors being rescued from the surface below. She thought about Ambassador, whose crystalline eyes had filled with tears when he understood what the humans had sacrificed. Yes, it was worth it. It had to be worth it. The medical bay was overcrowded. Doctor moved between patients with an efficiency born of long practice, but could see the strain in her eyes. They were running low on supplies. Too many wounded, not enough resources. Admiral said, pausing her work, "You shouldn't be here, you need rest." "So do you," replied. "How bad is it?" Hesitated. "We've stabilized most of the critical cases, but we lost 18 in the last hour alone. The synthetic blood supplies are almost gone. Pain medication is rationed." She glanced at the rows of occupied beds. "Morale is high, though. They're proud of what we did." Nodded and began walking through the medical bay. Wounded soldiers reached out as she passed, some to shake her hand, others just to touch her uniform to confirm that she was real, that their commander was still with them. A young corporal named lay in one of the critical care beds. His body was broken from a boarding action, crushed when a devourer had caught him in its massive arms. The doctors had done what they could but could see the truth in their eyes. He would not survive the night. She knelt beside his bed. "Corporal." His eyes opened slowly. Recognition flickered in them, followed by something that might have been a smile. "Admiral, we won. We won because of soldiers like you." Tried to laugh, but it turned into a cough. Blood flecked his lips. "Worth it," he whispered. Tell them we came, tell them we tried." Took his hand. It was cold, but his grip was surprisingly strong. "I'll tell them. Everyone will know what you did here." Closed his eyes. His grip loosened. The monitors beside his bed began to beep faster, then slower, then not at all. Stayed with him until the end. Then she stood, straightened her uniform, and continued her walk through the ship. There would be time for grief later. Right now, her people needed to see strength. She found Commander on the observation deck, staring out at the planet was still burning in places, but the fires were smaller now. The Devourer ground forces had been captured or destroyed. Rescue ships were landing in the ruins of cities, pulling survivors from the rubble. "The Council will condemn us for this," said without turning around. "We violated 17 treaties just by being here. Contact with protected species, military action without authorization, intervention in a sovereign system." He paused. "We'll be facing inquiries for years." "Let them condemn us," replied. "Let them hold their inquiries. Let them write their reports and pass their resolutions." She moved to stand beside him. Someone needed help. We helped. That's what humans do. Finally turned to look at her. There were tears on his cheeks, which surprised her. She had never seen him cry before. My son was on he said quietly. She went down in the first wave. No survivors. Felt her heart crack. She had not known, had not said anything, had simply continued doing his job while his child died in the void. I'm sorry, she said. The words felt completely inadequate. He volunteered, continued. When the beacon came through, he was supposed to stay behind, reserve duty, but he asked to be reassigned to the combat fleet, he said. His voice broke for a moment. He said someone needed help. He said we had to go. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the stars. A chime from the communication system interrupted them. Lieutenant's voice filled the observation deck. Admiral, Ambassador has arrived. He's requesting permission to come aboard. Grant permission. Have him escorted to the observation deck. Minutes later, Ambassador entered, accompanied by a delegation of survivors. They were damaged, traumatized, but alive. And when they saw Admiral, they stopped as if frozen by her presence. Stepped forward. For a moment he seemed to struggle for words. Then slowly he began to bow. Not the shallow bow of diplomatic greeting, but the deep bow of absolute reverence, the bow that reserved for their most sacred rituals. The other followed, bending low, their crystalline bodies catching the starlight. Please, said, moving to lift upright. You don't need to do that. We do, replied. His voice was thick with emotion. Admiral, my people have believed in peace for 10,000 years. We believed that violence was always wrong, that warriors were relics of a primitive past. We looked down on species like yours, species that fought and killed. He raised his eyes to meet hers. We were fools. You came for us. You bled for us. You died for us. Strangers that you had never met on a world that you did not know. How can we ever repay such a debt? Considered the question. She thought about Corporal, who had died asking her to tell people that they came. She thought about Son, who had volunteered to fight for people he would never meet. She thought about all 12,000 souls who had given their lives in the last 48 hours. You don't repay it, she finally said. But someday, somewhere, someone else will call for help. Someone weak and frightened, someone with no hope, someone who believes they are about to die. She put her hand on shoulder. When that day comes, you answer, you go, you fight, you become what we were for you today. Nodded slowly. We will. I swear it on the ashes of our world and the memory of your fallen, that will never stand by while innocents suffer again. Outside the viewport, the first light of dawn was breaking over the fires were dying. The smoke was clearing. And somewhere below, survivors were emerging from the ruins, looking up at the human ships in orbit, knowing that they were alive because strangers had cared enough to come. The cost had been terrible, but the job was done. They had answered the call. Word spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Within hours of the battle's end, every major species had heard some version of the story. The details varied depending on the source, but the core remained the same. They had come, not for conquest, not for resources, not for power. They had come because someone they had never met, someone on the other side of the galaxy, had said please. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. Representatives from 100 species gathered in the Great Hall on Nexus Prime, their voices raised in confusion and fear and wonder. The Council had banned contact with humanity for good reason. The humans were dangerous, unpredictable, violent beyond measure, and now they had been unleashed. This is a disaster, declared Ambassador of the Collective, his tentacles waving in agitation. The humans have demonstrated exactly why we quarantined them. Look at the destruction they caused. Look at the lives they took. They took the lives of devourers, countered representative of the Union. The devourers were slaughtering the humans stopped them. At what cost? And what happens next time? What if the humans decide that we are the enemy? The debate raged for hours. Some demanded that humanity be quarantined more strictly than ever. Others argued that the humans should be welcomed into the galactic community. Still, others suggested that the Council should do nothing, that the humans would eventually destroy themselves, as all violent species did. But then a new voice entered the chamber, a voice that silenced all others. It was a devourer officer who had survived the battle. He had been captured during the fighting and was now a prisoner awaiting trial for war crimes. The Council had summoned him to testify, to provide an account of what had happened. Was large, even for a devourer. His chitinous armor was from a dozen battles. He had personally killed hundreds of beings across a dozen worlds. He had never known fear in his entire life. Until now. "You don't understand," said. His voice was flat, empty, as if something essential had been drained from him. "You talk about the humans as if they are just another species. They are not. They are something else entirely." "Explain," demanded the Council President. Was silent for a long moment, collecting his thoughts. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "We are predators. My people have hunted and harvested for 1,000 generations. We know how predators fight. We know how prey fights. The patterns are always the same. Predators attack when they have advantage. Prey runs or surrenders when it does not." He shook his massive head. The humans did neither. They were outnumbered 3-1. They should have retreated, regrouped, waited for reinforcements. That is what any sensible species would do, but they attacked. They charged into our formations as if their lives meant nothing, as if our numbers meant nothing. His eyes, all 7 of them, focused on something far away, something terrible. And they didn't fight like predators. Predators fight for survival, for territory, for resources. They fight for themselves, but the humans, he struggled for words. They fought like they were protecting their own offspring. Every life meant something to them, every single one. They took wounds that should have killed them and they kept fighting. They lost ships, lost soldiers, lost friends, and they kept coming. They would not stop. They would not give up. They would not let us win. The chamber was silent. Even the most hostile council members had nothing to say. "I have conquered 100 worlds," continued. "I have faced every kind of enemy, but I have never seen anything like the humans. They are not monsters. Monsters we could understand. Monsters we could fight." He paused. "They are something worse. They are protectors. And once they decide to protect something, nothing in the galaxy can stop them." The council session ended without resolution, but something had changed. The fear remained, but it was mixed now with something else. Curiosity, respect, wonder. The recording of testimony spread across the galaxy, and with it spread another recording, a clip from the battle that had been captured by sensors. It showed Admiral's face, calm and determined, as she addressed the Devourer fleet. "Strangers are just friends we haven't made yet." The words became a phenomenon. Species that had hidden from the galaxy began to emerge, hopeful that perhaps there was someone out there who would help them if they needed it. Species that had preyed on the weak began to reconsider their actions, afraid that their next victims might call for human aid. And on Earth the fleet came home. The city of New Seoul had never seen crowds like this. Billions of people filled the streets, the rooftops, the parks, every available space. They waved flags and banners. They cheered and wept and sang songs that had not been sung in centuries, songs of heroes and battles and sacrifices. The unbroken Soul landed in the central plaza, its hull unburned, its engines barely functioning. But it landed, and when the main hatch opened, the crowd fell silent. Admiral walked down the ramp first. She was followed by Commander, Lieutenant, Ensign, Sergeant Major, and all the others who had survived. They walked slowly, carrying themselves with the weight of what they had done. The President of the United Terran Federation met them at the bottom of the ramp. She held a medal, the highest honor humanity could bestow. "Admiral," she said, On behalf of a grateful planet I present you with." "No," interrupted. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the silent plaza. "I don't want medals, none of us do." She turned and gestured to the ship behind her. 12,000 people gave their lives out there. They're the heroes, not us." She faced the crowd. "If you want to honor someone, honor them. Remember their names, tell their stories. Make sure the galaxy knows what they sacrificed and why." Her voice cracked slightly. "They answered a call from strangers. They died for people they had never met. That's what humanity is. That's what we are." The crowd began to cheer again, but this time it was different. It was not celebration. It was remembrance. It was promise. A memorial was built in New Seoul, a wall of black stone bearing 12,000 names. At the base of the wall, a simple inscription was carved in a dozen languages, including, "They called, we came." Ambassador arrived on Earth 1 month after the battle. He was the first to ever set foot on the human, and he was terrified. The gravity was crushing. The sun was blinding. The air was thick with strange smells and sounds. Everything about this planet seemed designed to kill. But the humans welcomed him with open arms. They gave him special equipment to help with the gravity. They adjusted the lighting in his quarters. They did everything possible to make him comfortable. On his first day, visited the memorial. He stood before the wall of names and wept, his tears leaving crystalline trails on the ground. A small human child approached him, perhaps 5 or 6 years old. She was holding a flower, a simple white daisy that probably cost nothing at all. She held it up to him without a word. Took the flower. He looked at the child's face, so open and trusting and kind, and in that moment he understood everything. These monsters that the galaxy feared were not destroyers. They were guardians. They were protectors. They were the ones who came when no one else would, who fought when no one else could, who gave everything for strangers and asked nothing in return. The galaxy had been so wrong about them. Knelt down to be at the child's eye level. "Thank you," he said. The child smiled and ran back to her parents. Years passed. The galaxy changed. Humanity joined the Galactic Council, not as conquerors but as partners. They helped rebuild They established trade routes and alliances and friendships with species that had once feared them. But they never forgot the lesson of that first contact, and neither did anyone else. Because now the galaxy knew a simple truth. If you were weak, if you were helpless, if you were facing destruction with no hope of survival, there was someone you could call. Someone who would cross the stars to help you. Someone who would fight and bleed and die for strangers, simply because it was the right thing to do. The humans would come. They would always come.